Great teachers are encouragers, but they are so much more, like make you love a subject that you didn't like before. I may not be the world's greatest mathematician, but once by chance, I danced a dance about subtraction and addition in a class of Mr. Rembrandt's. Oh, how I tallied as I dilly-dallied and pranced. I jumped so high, I split my pants, but nobody laughed, and Mr. Rembrandt was impressed. And yes, he's one of the teachers that I loved best. Dr. Chang had tiny purple circular glasses, and she made science one of everyone's favorite classes. She used replicas of planets instead of bathroom passes. And in our play about the elements and their atomic masses, I played argon, one of the noble gases, with a big number 18 pinned to my chest. Dr. Chang was one of the teachers that I loved best.
Want to save time with common emails, grading comments, and repetitive typing? Use TextBlaze today to eliminate repetitive typing forever and get your work done within your working hours. Create easy-to-use templates with endless customizations and powerful automation. Try it free today at textblaze.me/shiftingschools. That's textblaze.me/shiftingschools. And thank you to TextBlaze for being a Shifting Schools partner.
For Teacher Appreciation Week at my kids' kindergarten, I wasn't the class parent, so I hadn't organized anything like that. But I thought, I should do something. So I found an old video of me reciting What Teachers Make on YouTube. You know, the one with like 6 million views on it. And and I was like, I know you've probably heard this, but here, this is me from 20 years ago. And my kid's kindergarten teacher was like, "Holy, that's you! I know that." So it's gotten so. I've gotten to the point where even my kids' teachers know that poem.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's such a good poem. And of course, it'll be in the show notes and everywhere else as this comes out for Teacher Appreciation Week. But Tricia, do you want to kind of get us started?
Your voice is so recognizable. I mean, I almost feel like we shouldn't have introduced you, and I feel like we could have had you read the alphabet, and I wonder how many of our listeners would be able to put it together. Who it was.
It's funny because my hair changes. You know, I donated 12 inches of my hair to the American Cancer Society when I convinced 1,000 people to become teachers. And I really like beer. Jeff, you look like you might enjoy a nice IPA.
Yes, I do.
Tricia, maybe you too. But my weight goes up and down. So I tend to, my appearance can change, but I'll be at a place. I remember I was up in Seneca Falls, where the first women's suffrage, first annual Conference of the Woman, I think it was called, in 1848. Partly organized by one of my great-great-great-grandmothers, Lucretia Mott, famous proto-feminist and abolitionist. And I'm walking around the Women's History Center there, and there are these two people, and they look like they might be teachers, and they're looking at me, and they just can't quite decide whether they should come up to me. And I say, do you have any potholders of Lucretia Mott? And they turn around and go, I knew it. As soon as you spoke, I knew it. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, and, your voice has both, I mean, the tenor of it has stayed the same, but now that we have your new book, The Teachers I Love Best, to me, again, it's sort of like an extension of, as we've been talking about, your award-winning, very well-known spoken word performance, What Teachers Make. But this is also a completely new venture for you. Could you talk to listeners actually about how that book has asked you to kind of rethink your art and craft?
Yes. As a matter of fact, my editor at Doubleday, Francis Gilbert, originally approached me and said, I see that you've written a poem called What Teachers Make, and that you've actually published a book of essays that sort of backs up the pedagogical philosophy behind every line, which I loved writing that book. I got to sort of expand on the poem, write a little chapter on every line. She said, have you ever considered writing a children's book? Basically, What Teachers Make, the kids' version. And I was like, oh God, do I really want to recycle this poem again, in my career?
Yeah.
Yes, that poem has done wonderful things for me, but I've got other poems. I've got other poems about teaching. So I sent her a group of other poems that I've got about teaching and said, I can, if you insist, write a children's book version of What Teachers Make. But what I would rather do is adapt one of these poems.
Mm.
And one of those poems was called "The Teachers I Loved Best," a panegyric, an ode to the type of teachers. And I knew that I was going to be able to talk about all kinds of different teachers. And she like picked right up on that one and said, I've changed my mind. That is exactly the kind of picture book that I want to publish. And I know exactly the illustrator that I want to
Oh,
use.
wow.
Erica Root, I've never met her, but I've kind of have a literary crush on her drawings for years. So I want you to write this poem and I want you to write, I'll get her to do the illustration. So it was wonderful that it didn't have to be the teachers, What Teachers Make. And so I was just looking at this. I think I probably wrote it as a slam poem, a spoken word poem.
Yeah.
I really got my experience, in the poetry slam, and all of my poems are meant to be spoken out loud. So the process of sort of, as you said, reimagining it, I did have to make some adjustments. And I can talk about those if you want, but I tend to make my answers too long. So
Well, I'd love to hear some about like what are some of the adjustments? I mean, because I think this is great. Going from spoken word poems to a book, there has to be some adjustments that are made, and just thinking differently about how you deliver it, or even just the idea that there's an illustration to go along with it. Where when you're doing a spoken poem, they're right. You are the illustration.
right. It's so It's interesting you say that because just yesterday, I know that this is going to air during Teacher Appreciation Week, but just yesterday I recorded the audiobook
Oh
for
wow.
this. So I've recorded a couple of books on tape, written by other people, and of course I did voiceovers for Burger King. Burger King bought my first apartment. Just I had me saying, "When you have it your way, it just tastes better." Burger King. Offer available for a limited time only. Price and participation may vary. So I went down to this studio in Brooklyn, and of course the director is in California,
Yeah.
as I think you guys might be, and the audio engineer is in another room, and I'm in this. It's almost like I walked into they have two studios in this big complex down in Sunset Park called Industry City. And I walked into one suite. There's the water cooler, and there's where you wait, and there's the apple, because nothing prepares the mouth for reading. You guys probably know this as podcast hosts. If you're a little dry mouth, eat an apple. It prepares the mouth for speaking. And then they take me into this room where there are about 6 rolling soundproof closets,
Uh-huh.
and all of them say on air, recording.
Wow.
And he's like, you go in this one here, and you go in, and I put on the headphones, and there's the director I can't see her,
Yeah.
but she's in California saying, okay, let's read this. And now, okay, that was good. Now I want you to bring some of your spoken word slam energy to it, because often when you're to answer your question directly, the one you asked, if it's you on stage performing in front of a group audience, you need to bring the energy,
Right.
and you need to gesture, you need to use eye contact. You can't be looking down at the book. I'm sure I will memorize this poem by the time I have done a bunch of readings to it. When you are talking on a podcast, when you are reciting the book for audio download, you cannot bring that level of
Mm.
live energy. So you have to tone it down a little bit. That one of the things people make fun of spoken word poets for is reading too fast and reading too loud. This is audio. You're speaking to kids, so get a little bit, put a smile in your voice,
Yeah.
and read with energy. But the other thing that I had to realize is that the poem that is coming out in the book is very much written in rhyming couplets. And the only way that I rebelled against that is that occasionally I would have three rhymes or four rhymes. And I tried not to always use end stopped rhymes like da 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 cat, da 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 mat, because that drives me crazy. And you would never do that in a slam. Have such a obviously repetitive rhyme scheme. So what I first gave, that my first couple of drafts that I gave to Francis Gilbert, I was sort of rebelling against the rhyming couplet. And I would, it was a jingle jangle. I like things that rhyme accidentally, when I'm not even trying to rhyme particularly mentally. See what I just did there? That's the way I like to rhyme. Like, ooh, it's here, but it's not there. It's like a pair of canvas sneakers that you put in the dryer. It's a tumbling beat, but it's not regular. It's surprising. And here it is, but here it's not. And now, oh my God, now there's three. And Francis kept saying, what is going on with this rhyme? Would you just pick a rhyme scheme and stick to it? And I was like, you mean be boring? It's like, no, it's not boring. You know who the age is of this book? And I was like, anywhere between 8 and 90. She's like, no, it's 8-year-olds. And maybe they've got a grandparent reading. I was like, oh, you're right. Okay. So I had to sort of fall in love again with rhyming couplets and lean into the rhyme scheme more so than I would have if I were still writing for the slam.
I like that.
I love that idea of the surprise, because I think, again, the surprising rhymes, they keep the reader or the listener kind of on, the end of the seat of their chair, like waiting for what the connection will be or how you're going to take, that rhyme and actually build something on it. And that kind of actually reminds me of something that you've done inside the book, The Teachers I Love Best. And I'm thinking about this because I am not in California. I'm in kind of the opposite of California, Taylor. I'm in Ottawa. And last week we had temperatures of minus 30 degrees
oh my goodness.
Celsius.
Only when I was in Fairbanks have I ever experienced anything that cold.
Yes. But what was nice was the local news actually did this really great job of they had photos of crossing guards who they had no choice. They had to be out there doing their job in, brutal conditions. And you have a line in your poem in the book that reads, quote, "The definition of a teacher should be anyone who makes you work harder than you thought you could." And that's, again, you're talking about educators, not just as the classroom teacher, but the role that principals, librarians, crossing guards play, right? It's a community that has to come together to do this seemingly impossible task of, inspiring children. And we'd love to hear more from you about why it was important to include kind of a broader definition of who an educator is.
Okay. Be sure to go back and ask me about leaving space for the illustrator to do her work, because that was an important part of your question, Jeff, that I just remembered that I didn't get to.
Okay.
An early draft that I gave to Francis mentioned specific teachers by name, and I actually have that here, and maybe in a moment I'll read you. I don't think I should read the entire book as it is going to be published in March. Francis Doubleday would probably not like that, but I can. There's nothing that says I can't read you parts of the original poem that got cut. And so I had specific teachers that I liked, Dr. Chang and Mrs. Greer, and there's another one that I'll tell you about. And I wanted to do not just my mother-in-law is a former teacher, principal, and assistant superintendent out in Edmonds, Washington public schools, and she was saying, "Hey, why aren't principals getting any love in your book?" And I thought, oh. Well, since Frances doesn't want me to talk about specific teachers, she wanted me to keep it a little more general. She said, take the specific names of specific teachers out, which was another thing that I thought, wait, no, you're going in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
As a poet, you need to, as a writer, you need to learn that the more specific you get, the great paradox of writing is that the more of my own life I put into my writing, the more other people will be able to see their own lives in it. You think that, I need to pull back a little bit and be a little more general. In general, that's not true. But every time Francis gave me notes for how to improve the draft that Doubleday has published, if initially I would say, "Oh, darn, I wanted you to say this is perfect. Every word is perfect. Let's not touch it."
Yeah.
But she always had notes, and I was like, "Okay, fine. I'll do what you think is going to make this better." And she was always right. She was always right. And I think we ended up with the best children's book that I am capable of writing. So my wife is an editor as well, and she said, "See, editors do their job. We really know what we're doing." All right, this is a long way of answering the question about why I expanded the definition of teachers. If I was not going to be allowed to talk about specific teachers, named teachers, and was going to talk about teachers in general, then I wanted to expand the definition of teacher so that this was a love letter to anyone who makes you work harder than you think you can. And that is the job of the teacher, to give you a green light. If that is what you want to do, I encourage you. Do it, do it, do it. And let me help you. Let me show you the steps and then get out of the way and encourage you to work harder than you ever thought you could. And so I included principals to include my mother-in-law, and crossing guards and librarians and and the custodian of the school. If they encourage you to clean up after yourself, then they're a teacher. So that was a way of sort of spreading the love around.
Hi, folks. We'll get back to today's conversation in just a minute. We're super excited to introduce you to and add Text Blaze to our growing list of Shifting School sponsors. If you hate sending emails and working late while grading student assignments, and you're like most teachers, always looking for a way to save time and get your work done before you go home, well then, Text Blaze might just be your answer. With Text Blaze, you can save time on repetitive typing and get your work done within your working hours. Using Text Blaze, you set up keyboard shortcuts to insert frequent email replies, common grading feedback, and any repetitive text you find yourself typing. Text Blaze is a Chrome extension that once you install it, allows you to create customized shortcuts to use anywhere within your Chrome browser. So create custom shortcuts to use in any web-based LMS system like Google Classroom or Canvas, or any web-based email system like Gmail. Text Blaze has saved users over 28 hours a month. Think about that for a second. You spend a few minutes setting up your templated responses to students, parents, or colleagues, and then with a couple keystrokes, have Text Blaze write it for you. One of my favorite features is you can create a template and also have Text Blaze put the cursor where you want it within the template. So imagine you're sending home the same email over and over again to parents. You can create a Text Blaze template that writes the email for you and automatically puts the cursor where the student's name needs to appear within the email, saving you time and clicks. Don't take my word for it though. You can try it out for free by going to textblaze.me/shifting schools and set up your account and see how Text Blaze can save you time on repetitive tasks. So what are you waiting for? Visit textblaze.me/shifting schools to get started saving time today. That's textblaze.me/shifting schools. And we thank Text Blaze for being a Shifting School sponsors. And now, back to our conversation. I love that because it is, and there's so many great parts of the book. I want to go back and talk about that idea of leaving space for the illustrator, because the illustrations in the book, the parts that we've seen a little bit of, are just beautiful. And can you talk about like how did you have to change what you did for an illustration book like this for children illustration book?
I didn't change anything. I just trusted in the process. My experience with Francis the editor was so good that I trusted her, and I took the book into the directions that she requested. And I didn't know Erica Root before. I wrote her a handwritten letter. You can't stop me from writing handwritten letters. Actually, Frances did. She said, I encourage my authors, don't start communicating with the illustrator. That's the last thing you want, is the writer, going behind the editor's back saying, could you make this kid look a little prettier? So they handled that. And I left room between the lines for the illustrator to bring her art and her genius to it as well, without saying, and here's what I want the picture to look like on this page. There's a line in it that said, I had a science teacher once who had us put on a play about the solar system and the intricate way that the moon and their planets revolve around the sun. You can see me using enjambment in those lines, so that it doesn't just stop at the end of the line. I had a science teacher once who had us put on a play about the solar system and the intricate way that the moon and the planets revolve around the sun. Did you know that Jupiter has many moons? You will, because you are one. And so I just left that out there and trusted that Erica Root was going to draw a adorable photograph of these kids dressed up in planet costumes.
Yeah.
Frances cut my line. I wanted to have there was a whole stanza that was going to be a song in the voice of Callisto. Callisto is one of the planet Jupiter has about 80 moons, which I feel like nobody talks about. If anybody can name, 5 of Jupiter's moons, it's Ganymede, Io, Callisto. There, I've forgotten. I can only come up with 3. But that Suzanne Vega song, "My Name is Calypso," and it's about Ulysses. Ulysses spends a year on an island with Calypso, and she wrote a song from Calypso's point of view, being left by Ulysses. And so I had this little song that Callisto, one of the 80 moons of Jupiter's, was going to get a solo in this, imaginary kids musical about the solar system. But again, like it got cut. So working with other people who are good at what they do, you just need to, it's kind of like stopping in the middle of the poem and just leaving an empty space and saying, here's room for the other people to do what they do. Howard Ashman, who is a famous lyricist of Disney musicals, wrote much of the songs for Aladdin. And there's a line where he's writing the song, "Never Had a Friend Like Me." Do you know that? Do you guys have kids? You know that song?
Yeah.
And there's a line where he wrote, "Can your friends do this? Can your friends do that? Can your friends pull this out of their little hats?" And that, just to me, is exactly what I'm talking about. Just like, I don't have to tell the animators what this is. I'm just leaving room there. You've got 4.5 seconds to make as much stuff come out of Robin Williams' hat as you can think of, So that it was a wonderful process. And I hope I write another children's book, because when a good editor can put you together with other people who have skills, your job, even as the writer of the book, is to get out of the way and let them do what they do.
Yeah. Trisha, it's so funny listening to Taylor talk about this. We've done so many interviews where it always comes back to this creative collaboration, right? As you just have a creative collaboration, and there's trust involved, there's feedback involved, that goes into, no matter what the project is, it always comes back to being a creative collaborative project, which I think is just so cool. It's just a theme that constantly comes out.
I've never done improv. I've never done improv, but I do know that if there are 3 people in the scene, you're really only responsible for a third. You stay in your lane, and be your character. but you're not the only one up there. So
Yeah,
leave room for other people to be part of the scene.
I love that.
And it's great advice. And I also appreciate that it's likely much easier said than done. And, I've been very fortunate on my other podcast to get to interview loads of children's book writers who, again, talk about, as you've done, like sometimes they don't get to pick the illustrator. Sometimes there's zero communication throughout that process. And I'm guessing, Taylor, especially for someone like you, who you've had this incredible success in this creative space, right? That releasing some of that control and trusting, it's not always necessarily like a natural instinct, because in many ways, like, what works. You have seen what works creatively. So I'm just wondering if you might talk to like almost the emotional intelligence that goes into you being able to do what you're talking about, because I'm sure there are some folks listening, our educator audience, who, even designing a unit with somebody else, also you have to, listen to other people's ideas, think about what might have worked for them in the past. So that idea of giving some of that creative ownership over to others, and also realizing this thing that I have done that's always worked for me, just because I've done great things doesn't mean it, like Dylan Williams has this great expression of sometimes teachers have to stop doing good things in order to do great things.
Wow.
So could you just say a little more about that idea of how you get to that place of, I'm going to trust this other person who is also an expert in their own right? Like, because I think that emotional weight piece, it's not as easy as saying like, okay, I'll just do it.
I'm going to very quickly answer that question and then get to something else that you said about emotional intelligence, because there was a stanza in the original draft that I gave to Frances about emotional intelligence. And because I wanted to sort of encourage, and that was another thing that my mother-in-law, Dr. Ellen Kahn, said, like, well, what about teachers who can recognize in students, certain emotional intelligence? Don't you want to talk about that as well? So, but as far as sort of putting your ego in check and realizing, like, there's no easy way to do it if you're a type A person and you want to have control. I'm a 4-time national poetry slam champion, so I know what I'm doing when I'm up on stage and presenting a poem in front of a group of people. But this was my first children's book. I didn't want to go in there and be all white man, like, listen to me. So, and also being a white man is more and more for me about shutting up and listening and letting other people have put in their 2 cents. So, is it hard? Yeah. Is it vital? Yes. Am I glad I did it? Yes. Now let me talk about emotional intelligence. Can I read a couple of these stanzas that were in a draft of the original book? I think I can do that in double that. You're not going to get in trouble with Doubleday.
I hope not.
If we get
Taylor,
sued, we'll just be like, hey, Taylor, that Burger King money, you've got to give us some.
Great teachers are encouragers, but they are so much more. Like, make you love a subject that you didn't like before. I may not be the world's greatest mathematician, but once by chance I danced a dance about subtraction and addition in a class of Mr. Rembrandt's. Oh, how I tallied as I dilly-dallied and pranced. I jumped so high I split my pants, but nobody laughed, and Mr. Rembrandt was impressed. And yes, he's one of the teachers that I loved best. Dr. Chang had tiny purple circular glasses, and she made science one of everyone's favorite classes. She used replicas of planets instead of bathroom passes. And in our play about the elements and their atomic masses, I played argon, one of the noble gases, with a big number 18 pinned to my chest. Dr. Chang was one of the teachers that I loved best. Now here's the stanza about emotional intelligence. And I had forgotten about this until right before I got on the air with you guys. Once in a class of Mrs. Greer's, my friend Lily was deeply sighing. Lily was my neighbor for a couple of years. Although Lily looked like she was sighing, I knew that she was trying her best to keep from crying. I didn't know why she wanted to cry, but I didn't want her to feel alone. So I looked in her eyes and I cried tears of my own. Later that day, after I got home, Mrs. Greer called my mom and they cried on the phone. God, I'm almost getting emotional reading
Wow.
that
Yeah.
about this little kid. All she did was, cry tears with her friend because she saw her friend was hurting and like, excuse me, Mrs. Greer, Lily's hurting. And she did such a good job of that Mrs. Greer, called I'm sure Mrs. Greer called Lily's parents
Yeah.
and said Lily had a tough day, and we went to the nurse's office and we sorted it out. But then, if you know my work, you know how much I, as a teacher, loved calling home to tell parents that their kids had done something amazing in class. I was never emotionally intelligent enough to be able to recognize, what's happening here in this class. But I love the idea of a teacher calling a mom and saying, I witnessed a moment of great emotional intelligence today in class, and your kid helped Lily. Anyway, those are 3 stanzas that are not in. Oh, here's a 4th one. Talk about expanding the definition of what it means to be a teacher. I learned about nutrition from Miss Ruby, the lunch lady. Talk about carrots. She'd make you munch the bunch, lady. Forget your avocado toast. Miss Ruby was no brunch lady. Can you guess why my poems pack such a powerful punch? Maybe it's all about eating healthy and right. Miss Ruby said I was going places. I've just got a hunch, baby. So that's the kind of the jingle surprising. Oh, where am I going? And Francis was like, okay, love the energy, but let's contain it a little bit. The genie gets its power from the bottle.
Ooh, I like that.
That's Robert Frost. Robert Frost.
I like that. That's so good.
Tricia, did I give enough attention to the question as you asked it before swerving to the question that
absolutely.
I wanted to answer? Okay.
No, and they're connected because I think that gets to the infinite nuances of what a teacher does, right? The curriculum is like 10% of the work, I think, of an educator because we're dealing with human beings, which, again, it's Teacher Appreciation Week, but I think we want to get to a place where we're appreciating educators all the time, all year, that maybe we don't even need the week. And again, your spoken word poem, What Teachers Make, it's featured on the TED site as one of their best of the web highlights. You've got millions of views. And that performance ends with you stating that, quote, teachers make a difference. So in closing, we'd love to hear from you. And I almost feel like maybe I can guess your answer. In your journey,
is it Tesla?
Through authoring this new book?
Pitbull.
No.
3 times a week.
It's not. I feel like maybe I'll type it into the chat and I'll see if your journey in authoring this. Who is that person who made a difference?
It's funny. I'm before I realized that you probably weren't going to ask me to read the text of the poem. I have what are called the galleys, or there's actually a word for it. It's not galleys, but they sent me the unbound copy of the book just to say, this is what it's going to look like. Do you see any final opportunities? This is your final opportunity to catch typos and stuff like that. Although, talk about leaving room for the experts to do what they do. There are no typos in this because they have people that do that will catch that. And earlier this week, I sent the book is dedicated to my 4th grade teacher, Kate Malonzi, and she's still alive, and we correspond. And I say that she was the first teacher to love me back. We haven't talked about love so much in this podcast, but it's a central part of the book. Love is at the center of every great teacher's lesson. If you've had even one, then you know they've been a blessing. The teachers I loved best were the ones who I sensed loved me back, and I didn't want to disappoint them. And that's why I worked my ass off. Can I say ass on this podcast? That's why I worked my ass off for these teachers, because I knew they loved me and I didn't want them to disappoint me. So Erica dedicates the book to all teachers who teach us how to be better human beings, I think is what she said. I dedicated my portion, the words, to Kate Malanzi, my fourth grade teacher, who was the first to love me back. But I have had several amazing teachers, and one of them is a teacher in graduate school. I went to graduate school in the middle of Kansas, and Jerome Deese, whose birthday was just yesterday, and I didn't even know that when I sent him. I sent him the galleys of the book and said, "You are one of the teachers who I knew loved me best." I am so blessed that I have had so many great teachers, and that just reminded me that at the end of this document that I have up in front of me, and this might be a good or terrible way to end this podcast, I have a list of rhymes that I'd written, and I can't remember how many of these I used in the actual book, but for the teachers I loved best, I was wondering whether I was going to use the word zest or pest, or I guess you guessed, all the rest. I feel blessed to get this off my chest. I hope no teachers arrive at school underdressed, but they may have confessed that it's been fun to be your guest, and I hope you get to digest. And sorry if I've digressed, but I speak sometimes in jest. I love education as a quest, and I hope you're impressed. And gosh, I have to stop because now I feel stressed. Now, that's just me reading a list of rhymes that I don't even know whether I used.
I love that. Well, Taylor, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. Your YouTube video, like I think before we started recording, you said you could like put your life into two parts before you did what teachers make, and after what teachers make. So I really appreciate you coming on. Looking forward to the book. I think this is the perfect podcast for Teacher Appreciation Week, and all you educators out there, no matter how old you are or what age of students you teach, you're going to want to go grab a copy of the book because it is beautifully written, great illustrations, and really is just a great book to talk with people of all ages with. So Taylor, thank you so much for writing it and for doing all you do for educators and making sure education is at the forefront of people's minds.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Just a reminder, you can save $25 on any of our learning pathways at shiftingschools.com by using the code SSPOD25 at checkout. If you like today's show, or if you have something you'd like us to talk about, send us an email at info@shiftingschools.com. And of course, rates and reviews are always appreciated. Until next time, we'll see you on the network.